Chapter 390. Xianxia did not turn down Qinji's request. After thinking about it for a while, he agreed in an extremely straightforward manner. Following this, Xianxia temporarily stayed in the imperial palace of the Qin Empire. Although his days were as carefree as an immortal's, Xianxia was still somewhat unaccustomed to life in the imperial palace. At night, there were always several armored guards and maids waiting outside the palace door. On one hand, they were there to ensure Xianxia's safety, and on the other hand, they were there to serve Xianxia. Even when Xianxia walked around the imperial palace, there were always several guards and maids following behind him. If it wasn't for the fact that Xianxia knew that this was a treatment that every distinguished guest had to enjoy, he might have really suspected that these people were here to monitor him, afraid that he would do something improper in the imperial palace of the Qin Empire. The next day, Qinji found Xianxia early in the morning and brought Xianxia to stroll around the imperial palace. He constantly introduced Xianxia to every place in the imperial palace. Xianxia didn't bring the white tiger with him when he strolled around the imperial palace. He didn't want the white tiger to be exposed to too many nobles, so before he left, he fed the white tiger several heavenly treasures, causing the white tiger to fall into a deep sleep with a blissful expression. The imperial palace of the Qin Empire was very large. Xianxia and Qinji walked around for an entire day and only managed to explore 2/3 of the imperial palace. The remaining 1/3 was either not in time or was in some forbidden areas. During this day, Xianxia also got to know many young masters and young ladies from noble families through Qinji's introduction. Their ages were all around the same age as Xianxia and Qinji. However, in front of these people, Qinji didn't introduce Xianxia in detail. He only said that Xianxia was a friend that he had made in private. This caused many young masters and young masters from noble families to disdain Xianxia. However, Xianxia's resolute and handsome face caused many young ladies of prominent status to cast strange glances at him. There were even a few lively and cheerful young ladies who directly opened their mouths to express their goodwill to Xianxia. However, Xianxia's popularity caused some young masters and young masters of noble families to be dissatisfied. Their gazes towards Xianxia were filled with intense jealousy. After Xianxia and Qinji left, many prominent princes and young masters immediately sent people to inquire about Xianxia's background. However, the results they obtained made everyone sigh in relief. This was because the information they found out was that Xianxia didn't belong to any major power. He was an unknown character. According to their guesses, even if Xianxia had a certain background, it was at most a power that couldn't be shown in public. In the evening, Xianxia finished his day's tour of the imperial palace. He and Qinji returned to the dazzling palace for a meal. This was Qinji's residence, and it was extremely large. There were several palaces, and all kinds of living facilities and leisure facilities were available. Just as Xianxia and Qinji were eating and chatting happily, a guard in armor ran in from outside. He knelt on one knee in front of Qinji and said respectfully, "Third Prince, Princess Qin Shuang, Princess Qin Yubing, and the Southern Commandery Princess have arrived at Cloud Palace." Cloud Palace was the palace where Qinji lived. Hearing this, Qinji frowned slightly and muttered, "Strange, why are they here?" Then Qinji seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Xianxia meaningfully and laughed, "Please, quickly invite them in." "Yes, Third Prince." The guard answered and immediately retreated. After the guard left, Qinji and Xianxia toasted each other and smiled faintly. "Brother Xianxia, I don't have such a deep friendship with the three of them. This is the first time they have come to my residence. I think they are here for you." Xianxia drank the wine in his cup and smiled bitterly. "Brother Qinji, you are being sarcastic." Qinji glared at him and said with a serious face, "Sarcastic? I'm not being sarcastic. Xianxia, don't doubt my words. Let's wait and see." Soon, 3 beautiful young girls in the prime of their lives slowly walked in from outside. These 3 were the most cheerful of the many princesses he had seen in the palace during the day. Princess Qin Shuang, who was standing in the middle of the crowd, winked at Qinji mischievously and said in a delicate voice, "Brother, Qin Shuang has never come here to see you before. Don't tell me you don't welcome me, your sister Huang?" Qinji laughed and said, "Welcome, welcome. How can I not welcome you? My two sisters, the Southern Commandery Princess, please sit down. You must have not eaten yet. Servants, quickly prepare 3 sets of tableware. The 2 princesses and the Southern Commandery Princess were forthright and generous girls, but their speech and behavior were full of the temperament of a lady from a noble family. They thanked Qin Ji politely. When the 3 of them sat down, Princess Qin Yubing glanced at Jianchen and then said to Qin Ji, "Oh right, brother, you have not introduced this friend of yours to me. I am very curious, how did you two meet?" Hearing this, Qin Ji winked mischievously at Jianchen and explained with a smile, "There is no harm in telling you. Brother Jianchen and I met at the mercenary tournament. We felt like old friends at first sight and have since become friends. Moreover, this brother of mine is the king of mercenaries who obtained first place in this year's mercenary tournament." "Ah, so he is the Jianchen who obtained first place in the mercenary tournament." The 2 princesses and the Southern Commandery Princess revealed a very surprised expression. The way they looked at Jianchen changed again, a pair of bright and beautiful eyes flashing with a strange light. Seeing the 3 princesses and the Southern Commandery Princess staring at him without blinking, Jianchen could not help but bitterly smile in his heart. He then fiercely glared at Qin Ji. However, Qin Ji acted as if he did not see Jianchen at all. A faint smile hung on the corner of his mouth as he continuously stuffed the delicacies on the table into his mouth. He was very happy to eat alone. "Wow, Jianchen, you are so powerful. You are actually the first place in this year's mercenary tournament. This means that you must be even more powerful than our brother. Come, I Sidian, propose a toast to you." The Southern Commandery Princess immediately raised the cup in her hand and said to Jianchen with a heroic expression. She had the demeanor of a chivalrous woman. After Situ Yen, Qin Shuang and Qin Yubing also raised their cups. The 3 princesses and the Southern Commandery Princess proposed a toast to Jianchen at the same time. At this moment, of course, Jianchen could not back down. He stood up from his seat and raised his cup with a smile on his face. He said some polite words to the 3 princesses and the Southern Commandery Princess and the Southern Commandery Princess. Then the 4 of them clinked their cups. Just as they were about to drink the wine in their cups, a loud noise came from outside. "Young Master Xiaohan, you can't go in. Without the 3rd prince's permission, you can't enter Yunxian Palace. Young Master Xiaohan, please don't make it difficult for us. Without the 3rd prince's permission, you can't enter Yunxian Palace. Get out of my way. Who do you think I am? I don't need to inform the 3rd prince when I come to visit." As he spoke, a young man about 25 years old strode in from outside. The young man looked dignified and wore a gorgeous green robe. Between his eyebrows, there was a strong sense of arrogance. He gave off the feeling that he did not care about anyone in the world. Behind the young man, 2 armored guards tried to stop him. However, the young man's status was not low. He had barged into the 3rd prince's Yunxian Palace, but the guards did not dare to do anything to him. "3rd prince, please forgive us." The 2 guards helplessly apologized to the 3rd prince. Qin Ji looked at the young man expressionlessly. Then he waved his hand at the 2 guards and said, "You 2 can leave now." "Yes, 3rd prince." The 2 guards acted as if they had been pardoned and quickly left. Qin Ji looked at the young man who had barged in and said in a deep voice, "Xiaohan, why did you suddenly come to my Yunxian Palace?" The young man named Xiaohan smiled and cupped his hands at Qin Ji. "3rd prince, tomorrow is His Majesty's 50th birthday. Xiaohan has come here to discuss the birthday gift with 3rd prince. If I have disturbed you, 3rd prince, please don't blame me." As soon as he finished speaking, Xiaohan suddenly looked at Qin Shuang, Qin Yubing, and the South Commandery Princess. He was shocked and said, "I didn't expect the 2 princesses and the South Commandery Princess to be here as well. What a coincidence. Oh, 3 princesses, what are you doing?" Xiaohan looked at the 2 princesses, the Southern Princess, and Jianchen in surprise. Even an idiot would know what the 4 of them were doing from such a scene. A hint of jealousy flashed in Xiaohan's eyes. However, he smiled and said, "Princesses, are you toasting with the 3rd prince's friend?" Princess Qin Shuang, Princess Qin Yubing, and the South Commandery Princess frowned at the same time. There was a hint of disgust in their eyes. They were very disgusted with Xiaohan. Princess Qin Yubing did not even look at Jianshan. There was a faint smile on her face. She raised her wineglass and smiled at Jianshan. "Let's drink." Princess Qin Yubing's voice was very soft. It made people's hearts tremble. Then, Qin Shuang and the South Commandery Princess raised their wineglasses at the same time with smiles on their faces. Seeing this, Xiaohan was furious. The jealousy in his heart was even stronger. He quickly said, "You can't do this. The three princesses are of great status. How can you drink with a stranger so casually? It's beneath your dignity." Hearing this, Qin Ji was furious. His calm eyes suddenly became fierce. He said in a deep voice, "Xiaohan, what do you mean by that? Could it be that the friends of my Qin Ji do not have enough status to drink with the three princesses?" Chapter 391. Xiaohan's words made Qin Ji's expression immediately become extremely ugly. However, before he could say anything, Princess Qin Yubing stared at Xiaohan with a frosty expression. She said angrily, "Xiaohan, is it your business who we drink with?" "That's right, Xiaohan. What we do is our own business. What does it have to do with you?" Princess Qin Shuang's face was also ugly. "Xiaohan, how high do you think your status is? If you didn't have a good grandfather, you wouldn't even have the qualifications to step into my Qin Huang Imperial Palace. How strong do you think you are? How amazing do you think you are? You're even inferior to my imperial brother. To think that your grandfather wasted so many heaven and earth spirit medicines on you. Even now, you're still only a great saint master. What a waste." The southern princess also spoke back, not giving Xiaohan any face. Hearing these words, Xiaohan's face became more and more gloomy. His eyes became incomparably cold. Qin Shuang and Princess Qin Yubing were both heavenly beauties and as beautiful as flowers. They had always been the targets of Xiaohan's pursuit. In the past, he had expressed his love for the two princesses more than once. Although he had been heartlessly rejected, Xiaohan had never given up because he believed that with his status and position in the Qin Empire, he was worthy of the two princesses. As long as the time was right, it wouldn't be too difficult for his grandfather to personally propose marriage to the king. However, he didn't expect that the two princesses he had always pursued in his heart would say such unpleasant words to him for an unknown stranger whose appearance made him jealous. How could Xiaohan, who had always boasted of his status, endure this? Especially the words of the southern princess. It was like a sharp sword fiercely stabbing into Xiaohan's heart. It deeply insulted Xiaohan. Xiaohan was so angry that he couldn't speak. His face turned green and white. Seeing that Xiaohan was defeated, Qin Ji had a gloating expression on his face. He said indifferently, "Xiaohan, my two sisters and the southern princess are having a meal with my brother. I already have a plan for my father's birthday, so there's no need to discuss it. Brother Xiaohan, please go back." Qin Ji looked outside and shouted, "Men, send Xiaohan back." Immediately, two maids walked over and bowed to Xiaohan. They smiled and said, "Young Master Xiaohan, please." Xiaohan took a few deep breaths as the flames of fury in his heart burned fiercely. He blamed all of this on Jianshan. At this moment, his jealousy and resentment towards Jianshan had reached an extreme. Fine. Southern Princess, if you say that I am not as good as the third prince, then I, Xiaohan, will accept it. Because compared to the third prince, who is extremely talented, I, Xiaohan, am indeed not good enough. But I want to ask, could it be that the person in front of you, is he that powerful? Apart from being a little handsome, he's not as good as me in terms of status, position, or strength. Xiaohan said word by word. The jealousy and resentment in his heart made him lose his mind. When the southern princess heard that, a mocking smile appeared on her face. She looked at Xiaohan with disdain and said, "Xiaohan, you only have your status because you have a good grandfather. You didn't earn it with your own efforts. As for your strength..." The southern princess looked at Jianshan with her beautiful eyes and then looked at Xiaohan with disdain. She said mockingly, "In terms of strength, you're not even as good as the third prince, let alone Jianshan. What's so great about him? I don't believe he's stronger than me." Xiaohan was furious. He glared at Jianchen and shouted, "Boy, Xiao Han, want to challenge you. Do you dare accept?" Jianchen frowned. Xiao Han's attitude made him very unhappy. At that moment, Xinji said, "Xiao Han, the southern princess is right. You're not my brother's match. Don't embarrass yourself. You two hurry up and send Xiao Han back." Xinji's tone was very calm. He didn't have a good impression of Xiao Han, so he didn't give him any face. "Yes, your highness, young master Xiao Han, piss off." Just as the two maids were about to ask Xiao Han to leave again, they were pushed aside by Xiao Han. Xiao Han stared at Jianchen with an extremely gloomy expression. Powerful saint force surged out of his right hand, condensing into a huge sword that was as wide as a palm. He pointed the sword at Jianchen and said angrily, "Do you dare accept my challenge?" Xiao Han's provocation infuriated Jianchen. He immediately slammed the table and stood up. His eyes were sharp as he shouted, "Xiao Han, you can't do whatever you want in Xingyun Palace. If you continue to be so rude, don't blame me for not giving you any face." However, the enraged Xiao Han had already lost his mind. He ignored the third prince's words and pointed his huge sword at Jianchen. He said again, "Do you dare accept my challenge?" "How dare you?" Qin Ji slammed his hand on the table. He was so angry that he wanted to teach Xiao Han a lesson himself. Jianchen raised his hand to stop Qin Ji. He stared at Xiao Han coldly and said indifferently, "Brother Qin Ji, since this brother wants to challenge me, I'll grant him his wish." Qin Ji hesitated for a moment before nodding. He said to Jianchen, "Brother Jianchen, please go easy on him." "Go easy on him? Teach him a good lesson. He comes to harass me every few days." "It's so annoying," Princess Qin Shuang said unhappily. "That's right, so annoying." Princess Qin Yubing's eyes also showed a trace of disgust. Jianchen looked at Xiao Han and said, "Do it." Xiao Han said in a deep voice, "Let's go outside. This place is too small. I don't want to destroy the third prince's Xingyun Palace." "There's no need." Jianchen shook his head gently and said indifferently, "I can't be bothered to move. Don't worry, I won't destroy anything here when I deal with you." Jianchen's disdain made Xiao Han even angrier. He said angrily, "How arrogant! I'll make you pay." With that, Xiao Han raised his saint weapon and slashed at Jianchen with all his strength. Princess Qin Shuang, Princess Qin Yushuang, and the commandery princess of the South Mansion exclaimed in unison. They quickly retreated a distance, fearing that they would be affected. Jianchen snorted coldly. He waved his hand and a chopstick on the table flew up by itself. It shot toward Xiao Han with a faint violet sword chi. Arg! Along with a miserable cry, a chopstick pierced through Xiao Han's right shoulder, stabbing into the bone that connected to his arm. Xiao Han didn't dare to move his right arm at all. "Wow, Jianchen, you're so strong. Too strong, too strong. Jianchen, you're too strong. You used a chopstick to defeat a great saint master like Xiao Han. Jianchen, you must teach me this move." The two princesses and the southern princess all clapped and cheered as they looked at Jianchen in admiration. Their eyes were filled with stars. Seeing that Xiao Han wasn't injured, Qin Ji sighed in relief. This was someone who dared to kill the young masters of the Shi and Jetta clans. He was worried that Jianchen would take Xiao Han's life in a fit of anger. "Why aren't you taking Xiao Han to heal?" Qin Ji waved his hand and ordered the two maids to escort Xiao Han away. Xiao Han endured the pain in his arm and glared at Jianchen with eyes full of hatred. He then left without looking back. After suffering such a great loss, he didn't have the face to stay. After Xiao Han left, Jianchen looked at Qin Ji and asked, "Brother Qin Ji, what is the background of this person called Xiao Han? His status seems to be quite high." Qin Ji sat down again and said, "Xiao Han's identity is indeed a bit special. In the palace, he's almost equal to us princes because his grandfather is the imperial teacher of our Qin Huang kingdom. He has a prominent status and is respected by everyone. Even my father has to treat him as an equal. 5 years ago, Xiao Han's father was the commander of the imperial guards of our Qin Huang kingdom. One time, when my father was attacked outside, Xiao Han's father used his own body to block the enemy's fatal attack for my father. Xiao Han's father died because of that. Because of that, my father dotes on Xiao Han and takes great care of him. That's why Xiao Han's status is almost equal to us princes. So that's how it is. How strong is Xiao Han's grandfather? Xianxia asked. A Heaven Saint Master, and an extremely talented 5th Cycle Heaven Saint Master. Qinji's face became serious. An extremely talented 5th Cycle Heaven Saint Master. Xianxia murmured. Then, a faint smile appeared on his face. After the meal, the 2 princesses and the Southern Commandery princess bid farewell to Xianxia and left one after another. Xianxia returned to his own resting quarters and sat cross-legged on his bed with his head lowered in contemplation. Tomorrow was the birthday of the Qin Huang Kingdom's emperor, and he still didn't know what he was going to present to the emperor. However, apart from a heaven-tier battle skill, a large amount of heavenly resources, and a Class 6 monster core, there didn't seem to be anything valuable on him. He definitely couldn't give away the heaven-tier battle skill. As for the Class 6 monster core, with the strength of the Qin Empire, he believed that it wouldn't be too valuable. At this moment, an idea flashed through Xianxia's mind. With a flip of his hand, a thumb-sized pill appeared in his hand. This was the 2nd Class 8 Radiant Spirit pill that Uncle Xiao had given him. Back then, he couldn't bear to use it, so he had kept it. Chapter 392. The birthday celebration of the King of the Qin Empire officially began the next day. Xianxia was called out by Qinji very early in the morning, and the 2 of them left together to celebrate the birthday of the King of the Qin Empire. Today, the imperial palace was especially lively. Many high-ranking nobles and members of the imperial family were all dressed up and brought birthday gifts. Accompanying them were the leaders of the various major powers in the Qin Huang Kingdom. In short, anyone who could enter the Qin Huang Kingdom's imperial palace was not a simple person. The Qin Empire was extremely powerful. It was in existence only second to the 3 great empires on the continent. Even with the entire continent in perspective, the Qin Empire could be regarded as a peak empire. As a result, aside from the various organizations in the empire, the people who came to celebrate the birthday of the King of the Qin Empire were all people of great statuses. They were either princesses or ministers of the empire. There were even a few imperial advisors who had personally come. Xianxia followed behind Qinji and arrived at an extremely large hall. When they arrived, there were already over 1,000 people gathered there. They were all dressed in luxurious clothes and possessed extraordinary bearings. They were all people who could be seen in public. Groups of palace maids in palace attire carried stacks of snacks as they walked in and out of the hall. They served every esteemed guest politely. "Greetings to your highness." "Greetings to your highness." Quite a few people immediately bowed or clasped their hands in greeting when they saw Qinji enter. They were either extremely respectful or filled with enthusiasm. Facing these people, Qinji returned their greetings with a warm smile. His attitude was easygoing and respectful. He didn't have the air of a prince at all. Xianxia followed behind Qinji with half his body. He liked to keep a low profile, so he did not want to become the center of attention. Unless he had no other choice, he would not show off. Naturally, many of the nobles in the hall noticed Xianxia. Some of them only thought that Xianxia was Qinji's follower and didn't pay much attention to him. However, the other group of people were more insightful. They could see that Xianxia had an extraordinary bearing. He was neither servile nor overbearing when facing the crowd. He always looked at them with a calm and emotionless gaze. His every movement carried the demeanor of an expert. Although he was young, he gave people a feeling that he was as steady as a mountain. Moreover, some people who were not weak even faintly felt a pressure from Xianxia's body. Their faces immediately revealed a look of horror. Strange, why do I feel that the person beside His Highness the Third Prince looks familiar? I feel like I've seen him somewhere before. A middle-aged man in a gorgeous robe with a resolute face stared suspiciously at Xianxia, frowning as he muttered to himself. He wasn't the only one who felt this way. Many people in the hall felt that Xianxia looked familiar, but at the same time, they felt a little unfamiliar. However, they couldn't remember where they had seen him before. Brother Jianchen, you should find a place to rest first. I still have to attend to the guests. At this time, Qin Ji said apologetically to Jianchen. Today was his father's 50th birthday. As the ruler of the Qin Empire, he naturally wouldn't personally attend to these people. Moreover, the people who had come this time were all people of high status and power. There were even envoys from neighboring countries, so naturally he couldn't let ordinary people take care of these people. His Majesty's sons and daughters were in charge. Moreover, this kind of gathering was a great opportunity for the princes of the Qin Empire to form factions. They could use this opportunity to build a solid foundation for their future struggle for the throne. Jianchen was no longer a child who didn't understand anything. He naturally understood how important this kind of gathering was to the third Prince Qin Ji, so he very understandingly separated from Qin Ji. Then, he took some delicious snacks and walked to an inconspicuous corner to sit down. He slowly enjoyed these delicious snacks that could only be eaten in the palace. At this time, a middle-aged man in a blue robe came to Jianchen's side and sat down. He looked at Jianchen, who was engrossed in eating the snacks, with a smile on his face and said, "This little brother, have we met somewhere before?" Jianchen raised his head to look at the middle-aged man, but he didn't have the slightest impression of him. He shook his head and said, "You must have seen wrongly, or you may have met someone who looks a bit like me." Hearing this, the middle-aged man nodded his head and said, "Perhaps. Right, I am Tai Mu Zhuang. What is this little brother's name?" Jianchen chuckled and said, "This little one is just a nobody. I'm not from the Qin Empire. I'm afraid you won't recognize me even if I tell you, so there's no need to mention it." Jianchen had just finished eating the snacks on his plate. He picked up the plate and left, going to the table in the center of the hall to take another one. After Jianchen left, Tai Mu Zhuang frowned in thought. He muttered, "An unknown nobody? Is that really so? Why do I feel like I've seen you somewhere before?" After thinking for a while, Tai Mu Zhuang couldn't find the answer, so he left in boredom. "His Majesty the King has arrived." At this moment, a long and loud voice suddenly rang out. Following this voice, the noisy hall suddenly became silent. At this moment, everyone couldn't help but turn their heads to look at the front of the hall. They saw a dignified middle-aged man wearing a purple and gold dragon robe, accompanied by a white-haired old man with a ruddy complexion, slowly walk out. The king of the Qin Empire was just 50 years old, but on the surface, he looked like he was only 40 years old. His face was ruddy and full of spirit, and his eyes were bright and full of spirit, flashing with the light of wisdom. The king of the Qin Empire had a total of 12 children, 7 princes and 5 princesses. The oldest was already more than 30 years old, and the youngest was not even 6 years old. At this moment, all 13 of his children were following behind him. "Greetings, Your Majesty. May Your Majesty live a long life and lead the Qin Empire to greater prosperity and strength." Everyone in the hall shouted in unison. Living a long life was the highest lifespan on the Tianyuan continent. Normally, only the king of a country could enjoy such a title. This was because 1,000 years was the lifespan of a heaven saint master. Saint rulers and even saint kings, who were above heaven saint masters, could not live past 10,000 years. They were all in the 1,000 number. Next, everyone presented their carefully prepared birthday gifts. Without exception, all of the gifts were priceless. There were even some precious items that were beyond the value of money. In addition, there were many ancient antique ceramics that were incomparably valuable. There were also many heavenly resources that were more than 10,000 years old, but they were all at least 10,000 years old. When most of the people had presented their gifts, a purple and gold jade box appeared in Jianchen's hand. He then held it with both hands and strode forward. He clasped his hands at the king of the Qin Empire and smiled. "Inside this box is a Class 8 Radiant Spirit pill. I've specially come to present it to Your Majesty to congratulate Your Majesty on Your Majesty's birthday." Jianchen was much more concise and did not use any fancy words. "A Class 8 Radiant Spirit pill? I heard that only Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters can create such a pill. It's truly a panacea for healing. Not only can it purge the body of all poisons, but it can also save people from dying." Class 8 Radiant Spirit Pills are extremely rare on the Tianyuan continent. They're life-saving treasures that even hermits covet. They're life-saving treasures. A few of the more experienced people in the hall began to sigh in amazement when they heard that it was a Class 8 Radiant Spirit Pill. They all stared at the box in Jianxin's hand with shining eyes because Radiant Spirit Pills of such a high level were basically extinct on the Tianyuan continent. Not only was it because Class 7 Radiant Saint Masters who could create such pills were as rare as phoenix feathers, but it also required a tremendous amount of effort to create such pills. The appearance of the Class 8 Radiant Spirit Pill had even moved the king. As the ruler of an empire, it was not difficult for him to obtain all sorts of heavenly resources and wondrous treasures. However, the significance of the Class 8 Radiant Spirit Pill was completely different. This was because it could be used to save lives. If used properly, its value would be immeasurable. The king signaled with his eyes and a white-robed old man immediately walked out of the crowd. He accepted the box in Jianxin's hand and poured out a thumb-sized pill from a white jade bottle to examine it. The old man was a Radiant Saint Master, so he could clearly sense the extremely dense Radiant Saint force within the pill. After confirming that there was no mistake, the old man beamed with joy. He carefully placed the pill back into the bottle before clasping his hands at the king. "Your Majesty, this is indeed a Class 8 Radiant Spirit Pill." The old man was extremely excited because such a high-level pill was just far too rare. Qin Ji glanced at Jianxin gratefully from behind the king. He knew extremely well just how valuable a Class 8 Radiant Spirit Pill was, yet Jianxin was actually willing to give something so valuable to the king as a birthday gift. The significance of this was so great that even Qin Ji felt proud. The gazes of the other princes who did not know Jianxin's background changed slightly as well. They all smiled and nodded at Jianxin in a friendly manner. A Class 8 Radiant Spirit Pill was not something that just anyone could take out. Jianxin's unintentional actions proved his identity without a doubt. The king immediately laughed heartily after hearing the old man's confirmation. Even the way he looked at Jianxin changed. He asked amiably, "Brother, you have an extraordinary bearing. I can tell with a single glance that you're a dragon among men. May I ask which family's young master you are to be willing to offer such a precious gift? You really make me feel ashamed." "Father, he's Jianxin. He's a friend I've made outside," Qin Ji said politely from behind the king before Jianxin could reply. As soon as Qin Ji finished speaking, a few cries rang out from the crowd. "Jianxin! I never thought that he would be Jianxin. No wonder I found him to be a little familiar. Is he the Jianxin who won first place in this year's mercenary tournament? His strength is comparable to a Heaven Saint Master. No wonder I felt like I'd seen him somewhere before. So it's him. I remember now. He's the Jianxin who won the title of Mercenary King. I saw him in the tournament. No wonder I found him to be a little familiar. It's because he's missing his hair and eyebrows. I actually failed to recognize him immediately." Chapter 393. Hearing these people's comments about Jianxin, the nobles in the hall all revealed astonished expressions. Soon after, they all looked at Jianxin with shock and disbelief. Everyone knew the name of this year's king of mercenaries, Jianxin. However, very few people had actually seen Jianxin before. What no one expected was that Jianxin was actually so young. From his appearance, he looked even younger than the third prince. In that case, Jianxin had cultivated for a few years less than the third prince. However, he possessed such great strength. This allowed everyone to see Jianxin's shocking talent. The king of the Qin Empire immediately laughed heartily. He looked at Jianxin with amazement and said, "Good, good, good. I didn't misjudge you. Jianxin is indeed a dragon among men. To be able to obtain first place in the mercenary tournament at such a young age, your future is limitless. It is my son's fortune to be able to befriend you." Xiaohan, who was standing in the crowd, stared at Jianxin with a gloomy expression. His eyes were filled with a venomous light. He gnashed his teeth and muttered, "I didn't expect you to be that T king of mercenaries. No matter who you are, I, Xiaohan, will not let you off easily." Hearing Xiao Han's muttering, a middle-aged man in green clothes stood beside Xiao Han and asked in a low voice, "Xiao Han, could this person be the one who insulted you yesterday and injured you?" "That's right. Uncle Mu Xiaoye, you must help me teach him a lesson. Otherwise I, Xiao Han, will not be able to take this lying down," Xiao Han said in a low voice. Mu Xiaoye was his grandfather's disciple and had a close relationship with him. Mu Xiaoye frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid this won't be easy. I didn't expect him to be this year's king of mercenaries, Xianxia. Although I don't know how strong he is, I think he must be much stronger than the third prince. Moreover, he has obtained the recognition of His Majesty. If I make a move against him, I'm afraid His Majesty will be displeased." "Uncle Mu Xiaoye, how old is he? Even if he can strengthen the third prince, he is definitely not your opponent. Perhaps he used some other method or got lucky to obtain that *T king of mercenaries. You can challenge him in public and humiliate him. As for His Majesty, I will naturally have my grandfather take action," Xiao Han said in a low voice. Mu Xiaoye nodded and said, "All right. It just so happens that I want to test his strength and see if this year's king of mercenaries is as powerful as the rumors say." After learning that Xianxia was this year's king of mercenaries, the king of the Qin Empire became much friendlier towards Xianxia. On the other hand, when the other princes standing behind him heard that Xianxia was the third prince's friend, some of their faces became extremely ugly. Only two of the younger princes remained calm, as if none of this had anything to do with them. Xianxia and the king exchanged some pleasantries before returning to the crowd. However, at this moment, all the nobles and leaders in the hall treated Xianxia differently. They all scrambled to establish a relationship with Xianxia. This was because every year, if the king of mercenaries could successfully mature, he would become a heaven saint master at the very least. There was even a very high chance that he could break through to saint ruler. To these people, Xianxia could only use his scalp and patiently return their greetings. At this moment, a loud and clear voice rang out in the hall, suppressing the noise in the hall. "Your Majesty, our Qin Empire has always relied on martial prowess to establish our empire and defend our empire. Today is your Majesty's birthday, so how can martial prowess be absent from the banquet? Your humble servant is itching to spar with the king of mercenaries, Xianxia. It can also be considered a performance on your Majesty's birthday as a gift. Please allow me, your Majesty." Hearing this, everyone turned their heads and saw a middle-aged man in azure clothes kneeling on one knee as he respectfully spoke to the king of the Qin Empire. Hearing this, the king of the Qin Empire looked at Xianxia with a smile and introduced, "Xianxia, this is the commander of the Imperial Guards, Mu Zhe." The king did not agree or disagree with Mu Zhe's request. Instead, he gave the choice to Xianxia because he really wanted to see what Xianxia was capable of. Xianxia smiled indifferently and walked out with large strides. He cupped his hands and said, "Since Commander Mu Zhe wishes to spar with me, then I will perform with Commander Mu Zhe. It can also be considered a gift to your Majesty." The king happily laughed and said, "Good, good, good. If that's the case, then let us all go outside and cheer for the two of you." Soon after, the king walked out of the palace accompanied by an old man. Behind him was a large group of nobles and leaders of various factions. In a spacious area, everyone formed a circle around Xianxia and Mu Zhe. Everyone was in high spirits. The battle between the king of mercenaries and the commander of the Imperial Guards was destined to be very exciting. In everyone's hearts, they wanted to know who was stronger between Xianxia and Mu Zhe. Only a few people who had personally witnessed Xianxia's strength at the mercenary conference revealed meaningful smiles. Mu Zhe held a light azure spear in his hand as he stared at Xianxia with a serious expression. Although Xianxia was much younger than him, he couldn't be careless because of his title as the king of mercenaries. Xianxia calmly stood 30 meters away. He calmly looked at Mu Zhe and said, "Commander Mu Zhe, please make your move." Mu Zhe couldn't help but frown when he saw that Xianxia actually wanted to fight him without taking out a saint weapon. Anger flashed through the depths of his eyes. In his opinion, Xianxia was blatantly humiliating him. Mu Zhe's gaze turned cold as he snorted. He stomped his feet on the ground and shot toward Xianxia. At the same time, his spear surged with wind-attributed saint force as it stabbed toward Xianxia. Xianxia wore a faint smile the entire time. He gently stomped his right foot on the ground and a thumb-sized pebble shot up. Xianxia calmly caught it in his hand. With a shake of his hand, the pebble flickered with a faint azure light as it shot toward Mu Zhe with lightning speed. Ding! With a clear sound, the thumb-sized pebble accurately struck the tip of Mu Zhe's spear. An inconceivably powerful force was transmitted from the pebble, causing the spear in Mu Zhe's hand to tremble. Mu Zhe's expression changed drastically. The powerful force immediately stopped his forward charge. He staggered back a dozen steps before stabilizing himself. His hands that were holding the spear began to tremble slightly. The web between his thumb and forefinger had already ruptured as blood flowed out. Mu Zhe paled in fright as he looked at Xianxia in shock. His face was filled with disbelief. Mu Zhe found it hard to accept that he couldn't even catch a pebble with his strength. Seeing how Xianxia had ruptured the web between Mu Zhe's thumb and forefinger with a single pebble, the surrounding people were all in an uproar. They all looked at Xianxia in disbelief. The impact of this scene was just too great. Did Xianxia use a battle skill? Many people thought to themselves. The king of the Qin Empire also sucked in a deep breath. He stared at Xianxia in shock for a while before shooting a glance at the old man behind him. Just a single pebble was enough to make the commander of the Imperial Guard suffer. This scene made the king realize that Xianxia's strength was much greater than he had imagined. Using an Earth Saint Master would not be able to accurately gauge Xianxia's strength, so he could only send someone stronger. The old man behind the king nodded slightly before striding forward. He said, "Xianxia, let old man deal with you." With that, the old man did not give Xianxia a choice. He turned into a blur as he charged toward Xianxia. A strange smile appeared on Xianxia's face. With a light tap of his finger, a faint azure sword chi shot toward the old man. The old man knew how powerful Xianxia was, so he did not dare to be careless. He clenched his hand into a fist and punched toward the azure sword chi with surging fiery red saint force. The azure and violet sword chi was dispersed by the old man's punch, and a shocking wound appeared on the old man's fist. The old man looked at the wound on his fist, and his expression gradually became serious. Then, he grabbed the air with his hand, and the fire elements in the world rapidly gathered. In the blink of an eye, they condensed into a huge red sword. Xianxia sneered when he saw this. He slowly raised his right hand and the fire elemental energy in the surroundings immediately condensed at a speed much faster than the old man's. It also formed a huge, fiery red sword. Whether it was the color or the temperature, it was much more powerful than the old man's sword. Controlling the energy of the world. He can actually control the energy of the world. This is an ability to control the energy of the world. Has he already reached the level of Heaven Saint Master? The sight of Xianxia condensing the energy of the world into a sword shocked everyone present. At that moment, the shock that Xianxia gave them was many times greater than when he had easily repelled Mu Zhe. Whether it was the nobles or the leaders of the various organizations, all of their eyes were wide open as they stared at Xianxia in disbelief. They had seen Heaven Saint Masters before, but they had never even heard of such a young Heaven Saint Master. How is this possible? Xianxia has actually broken through to Heaven Saint Master. Qin Ji also stared at Xianxia in a daze as he muttered in a daze. The king of the Qin Empire sucked in a deep breath and slowly calmed himself down. At that moment, he felt like his heart had never beat so violently before. If news of a Heaven Saint Master in his 20s spread, it would be enough to shake up the entire Tianyuan continent. Chapter 394. Shock and disbelief appeared in the eyes of the old man fighting Xianxia when he saw that Xianxia was actually able to condense the energy of the world into a sword. However, he immediately waved his hand and the huge sword of flames shot toward Xianxia. Xianxia attacked at the same time as the old man attacked. With a gentle wave of his right hand, the huge sword in front of him shot toward the old man. Boom! 2 streaks of fiery red light flashed and disappeared. 2 huge swords, which seemed to be able to burn the air, collided in the middle of the 2 people. Following a violent boom, flames lit up the sky. A huge fireball, which brought along an unbearable high temperature, rapidly spread out in all directions. Run! Back off! Protect His Majesty! The spectators in the surroundings immediately fell into chaos as they all retreated. At the same time, multicolored saint force flowed out of their bodies, forming a barrier to protect themselves and the important people around them. The expression of the king of the Qin Empire changed slightly when he saw the flames rapidly approaching him. However, at this moment, a white figure flashed by. An azure-robed old man radiating with dense wind-attributed saint force instantly arrived before the king of the Qin Empire. He grabbed the king by the shoulder and flew into the air, escaping the range of the sea of flames. Figures flickered in the surroundings of the imperial palace. Earth Saint Masters with powerful ripples of saint force hurried over from various parts of the imperial palace, accompanied by groups of golden-armored guards. All of them rushed over in a hurry. At the same time, 4 old men and 2 middle-aged men strode out from the crowd. The 6 of them formed a circle around the sea of fire. Then, they waved their hands in unison, using violent palm winds to suppress the flames that were rolling towards them. Xianxia and the old man had already been swallowed by the flames. However, although the flames were powerful, they did not affect them much. When the flames were a meter away from the 2 of them, they were stopped by an invisible force, unable to advance any further. "Old man will go up and fight with you," the old man shouted as he shot up into the sky. In the blink of an eye, he was floating 500 meters above the ground. His body had shrunk to the size of an ant. Around his body, a thick layer of fire element enveloped him. Xianxia did not show any signs of weakness. With a thought, the wind elements between heaven and earth rapidly gathered towards him. Then, they wrapped around his body and flew into the air, hovering 100 meters away from the old man. "What? Why how you can actually control the wind elemental energy?" The old man stared at the wind elemental energy around Xianxia with his mouth agape. His face was filled with shock. The faint azure light around Xianxia was obviously noticed by the people below as well. All of them were extremely shocked, and the Heaven Saint Masters hidden in the crowd involuntarily cried out as if they had seen a monster. Disbelief filled their faces. How is this possible? He clearly has fire attribute saint force. How can he control wind attribute saint force now? Does he not have fire attribute saint force, but wind attribute saint force? Impossible. No one has ever been able to control 2 elements on the Tianyuan continent. He must be using some method that we don't know about. Xianxia, can you control both the fire and wind elements at the same time? The old man hovering in the air asked in shock. Xianxia faintly smiled. He did not deny it and said, "That's right. I can indeed control both the fire and wind elements." "No, that's impossible. How can you control 2 elements at the same time? This has never happened on the Tianyuan continent," the old man cried out. Xianxia said, "Nothing is impossible in this world. There are many things that are even more profound and inconceivable in this world. It's just that this level of comprehension is not something that we can touch upon." Although the old man was extremely shocked that Xianxia could control 2 types of energy of the world, he still calmed down very quickly and said, "You're right. The mysteries of the world are still not something that we can completely understand." It looks like the old man has lost his composure. The old man paused before a huge, fiery red sword appeared in his hand. He glared at Xianxia and said, "Today, let me see just how powerful someone who can control 2 elements is." Xianxia smiled and raised his hand slightly. Immediately, all the pebbles in the pool seemed to be pulled by a mysterious force. They all broke out of the water and flew into the sky extremely quickly, hovering before Xianxia. "What's going on? Why are all the pebbles flying into the sky? What kind of ability is this? How did he do it?" Everyone's eyes widened when they saw this strange sight. They all discussed in great surprise. The king of the Qin Empire stared at the sky under the protection of 2 Heaven Saint Masters. He mumbled to himself, "This Xianxia is even more complicated than I imagined. He's reached Heaven Saint Master at such a young age. Such a genius is rarely seen on the Tianyuan continent even in 1,000 years. A heaven saint master beside the king sighed in amazement when he heard that. It's not just rare. It's basically rare even in 10,000 years. With the talent he has displayed, he'll become a saint ruler at the very least if he matures successfully. It won't be difficult for him to reach the level of the Holy Emperor. The king's expression immediately changed when he heard that. Even the princes standing behind the king were shocked when they heard this. They found it difficult to remain calm, and their gazes toward Xianxia were filled with deep envy and jealousy. On the other hand, Xianxia's joy was indescribable with words after personally witnessing Genshin's outstanding ability. At this moment, the old man in the sky began to move. He no longer dared to look down on Genshin, so he used his full strength. He charged toward Genshin with his huge sword and flames that could vaporize the air. Chapter 395. Watch out for my sword. The old man flew in front of Genshin and yelled out. His huge sword was covered in flames as it slashed toward Genshin. Genshin's gaze suddenly sharpened as a faint azure and violet light flickered in his eyes. The huge sword made of countless pebbles in front of him shone with a hazy azure and violet light as it shot toward the old man like a bolt of lightning. Boom! With a violent boom, the old man's huge sword collided with the sword made of countless pebbles. Quite a lot of the flames on the huge sword were dispersed, turning into sparks that shot in all directions. From afar, it looked like fireworks had bloomed in the air. It was an extremely spectacular sight. The old man's attack had reduced quite a few of the pebbles to dust, but there were still quite a few pebbles that remained in perfect condition that continued to shoot toward the old man. The old man's body was obstructed as he forcefully came to a halt in the air. Hearing the ear-piercing sound of something tearing through the air, the old man's face could not help but become even more stern. He immediately swung his huge sword and slashed out with surging fire-attributed saint force, forming a magnificent red blur in front of him that blocked the incoming pebbles. Normally, these pebbles would be as weak as tofu before a heaven saint master. They could be crushed without any effort, but the pebbles that had been strengthened by Genshin's azure and violet sword chi had become extremely powerful. As a large number of pebbles collided with the old man's huge sword, the sound of continuous explosions rang out in the air. Now, the old man's body had been completely restrained by the pebbles. Under the control of Genshin's mind, the pebbles had already scattered and surrounded the old man, attacking him from all directions. Just what kind of strange ability is this? The old man was secretly shocked. His body had already been protected by a barrier of fire-attributed saint force. He fended off the pebbles around him as he tried to think of a way to break free. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of ignoring the attacks around him and directly charging towards Genshin, but the attacks from the cobblestones were just too powerful. It would be very difficult for him to block the attacks with just a layer of energy around him. Moreover, the attacks were very concentrated, making it difficult for him to move an inch. Genshin grabbed at the air with both hands, and the fire elemental energy in the surroundings rapidly gathered as streams of light. They quickly condensed into two huge, fiery red swords in front of him. As soon as the swords were condensed, they turned into a streak of fiery red light that shot towards the old man. The temperature it gave off seemed to even burn the air. Wherever it passed, the surrounding space became a faint pink color. The old man's face had already become extremely stern. He sent out two strands of sword chi with lightning-like speed, colliding with the two swords condensed from flames from Genshin. With an intense rumble, the fiery light enveloped the sky. The waves of fire were like a magnificent army galloping in the sky, and also like a gorgeous flower blooming in the sky. The waves of fire that filled the sky were like surging waves that swept out in all directions. At this moment, the temperature in the world suddenly soared, making countless people in the palace below feel as if they were in a huge steamer. The scorching heat was unbearable. Genshin's eyes flickered with a resplendent light. Suddenly, the wind in the surroundings whistled through the air, producing ghostly wails and howls. It blew away the waves of fire that surged toward Genshin and headed toward the old man, completely submerging him in a single instance. Jianshan knew that an attack like this would not pose much of a threat to a Heaven Saint Master. At most, it would make him suffer a little. As a result, he did not stop there. Grabbing at the air with both hands, he condensed 2 more flaming swords that shot toward the old man. The swords immediately disappeared into the sea of fire. The next moment, a violent explosion rang out. The sea of fire churned violently as clouds of fire flew out, dispersing into the surroundings. A white figure flew out of the sea of fire. It was the old man who had been submerged in the sea of fire. Although the old man was not particularly injured, he was in an extremely horrible condition. His hair was disheveled and many of his clothes had been torn. He no longer possessed his sagely bearing from before. The old man hovered in the air in a rather stiff manner. He did not continue to attack, and Jianshan did not attack either. He understood that the old man was only testing his strength. It was not like there was some sort of irreconcilable enmity between them that required them to fight to the death. Very soon, the flames in the sky vanished. The heat that enveloped the entire imperial palace rapidly receded as well. The old man stared at Jianshan with mixed feelings. After being stunned for a while, he sighed in the end, "Old man has lost." Jianshan smiled and clasped his hands. "You must be joking, old sir. You probably only used less than 80% of your strength in this battle. If you had used your full strength, the outcome probably would have been completely different." The old man waved his hand and said, "A loss is a loss. Old man is not a sore loser. Although the old man did not use his full strength, your remaining strength is probably much greater than the old man's." Hearing this, Jianshan smiled and did not continue to dwell on this topic. He then slowly descended from the sky. Jianshan and the old man landed on the ground at the same time. Although there were over 1,000 people present, the entire place was silent. Whether it was the king of the Qin Empire, the members of the royal family, or the leaders of the various large organizations, they all stared blankly at Jianshan's young and handsome face. Not only had Jianshan reached the level of a Heaven Saint Master at such a young age, his strength had also greatly exceeded everyone's expectations. He had even caused an imperial advisor of the Qin Empire to sigh in admiration. At this moment, everyone was stunned by Jianshan's great strength and terrifying talent. If he could reach the level of a Heaven Saint Master in his 20s, just how terrifying would his strength be when he was 50 or even 100 years old? Wow, Jianshan, you really are too powerful. You've actually reached the level of a Heaven Saint Master. The silence was broken as the Southern Prefectural Princess stared at Jianshan with a face full of admiration. She clapped her hands and cheered. Princess Qin Shuang and Princess Qin Yubing also looked at Jianshan with a strange light in their eyes. Other than them, there were many other princesses and young ladies who looked at Jianshan with deep admiration. There were even a few young ladies who looked at Jianshan with infatuation. Although Jianshan's hair and eyebrows had yet to grow back, he was still extremely handsome. Coupled with the fact that he had reached the level of a Heaven Saint Master at such a young age, becoming a peak expert on the continent, he had become the Prince Charming of many of the young ladies present. Ah, good. Jianshan's strength has truly broadened our horizons. Jianshan, since you're friends with my son Jianshan, you're no longer an outsider. I'll be so bold as to call you my nephew. How does that sound? The king of the Qin Empire loudly smiled. He was very excited. Qin Ji, who stood behind the king of the Qin Empire, also faintly smiled. At that moment, he suddenly realized that he had never felt so excited before. At the same time, he was also rather shocked. Jianshan's sudden display of strength as a Heaven Saint Master had given him quite a fright. This was just far too shocking for someone of Jianshan's age. Jianshan calmly accepted the king of the Qin Empire's goodwill. This was something that would only benefit him. He immediately clasped his hands with a smile and said, "This is Jianshan's honor." The king of the Qin Empire was overjoyed. He laughed heartily again and said, "Since the battle is over, let's all return. Nephew Jianshan, let's go back to the skyscraper hall." With that, the king smiled deeply. He then grabbed Jianshan's hand in an extremely friendly manner and made his way back to the hall. He asked about Jianshan's well-being with great concern along the way, constantly calling him nephew. Xiaohan, who was hidden in the crowd, stared blankly at Xianxia. His face was blank as if he had suddenly become stupid. Impossible. Impossible. How could he be a Heaven Saint Master? This must be an illusion. Yes, it must be an illusion. Xiaohan's lips trembled slightly as he mumbled to himself in an almost inaudible voice. His voice was filled with shock and disbelief. At this moment, the pale-faced Muzai arrived before Xiaohan. Seeing Xiaohan's blank expression, he gently sighed and scolded, "You've offended someone you can't afford to offend. I never thought that he would become a Heaven Saint Master so soon. With such talent, his future is limitless. Even Imperial Protector Ta is not his opponent. Looks like even your grandfather might not be able to defeat him. No, I have to tell your grandfather about this." Xiaohan's face immediately changed when he heard that. He quickly grabbed Muzai's hand and said hopefully, "Uncle Muzai, do you think my grandfather will seek justice for me?" Muzai's face could not help but change when he heard that. He viciously glared at Xiaohan and said softly, "Why are you still so foolish? Don't bring this up again. Xianxia is also a Heaven Saint Master, and a talented one at that. Even the king is trying his best to rope him in. Your grandfather is no threat to Xianxia at all. If you don't repent, even your grandfather will be implicated." Xiaohan's face paled as he said with a trembling voice, "Uncle Muzai, what should I do now?" Muzai sighed and said, "You better apologize to Xianxia quickly. I have to tell your grandfather about this matter. I hope he can turn this matter into a small one, and a small one into nothing." Very soon, everyone returned to the hall they had been in before. The king pulled Xianxia to the front of the hall and sat down on the dragon throne. He then ordered a palace made to bring over a luxurious chair for Xianxia to sit beside him. He treated Xianxia more warmly than he treated his own children. The nobles and royal relatives did not object to the king's actions at all. They all smiled and nodded at Xianxia in a friendly manner, as if Xianxia really did deserve such treatment. The king of the Qin Empire could not hide his excitement. He looked around and cleared his throat, loudly announcing, "Since everyone is here, I will use this opportunity to announce a decree. Now, I appoint Xianxia as the Imperial Protector of the Qin Empire. Does anyone have any objections?" Chapter 396. P.S. The internet was cut off yesterday, so I couldn't update. For chapters will be updated today. This is the second one. The third chapter will be updated before midnight. The fourth chapter will be updated after midnight. The king of the Qin Empire couldn't hide his excitement. He looked around, cleared his throat, and said in a loud voice, "Since everyone is here, this king will take advantage of this good opportunity to announce a decree. Now, this king appoints Xianxia as the Imperial Protector of the Qin Empire. Does anyone have any objections?" As soon as the king finished speaking, the entire hall fell silent. Everyone stared at the king with their mouths agape. Their faces were filled with surprise and disbelief. The Imperial Protector and the State Preceptor were two completely different levels of status. The Imperial Protector was much more powerful than the State Preceptor in both status and power. An Imperial Protector could not only mobilize a large number of troops of a kingdom at will, but he could also order the State Preceptor to do things for him. In addition, the Imperial Protector also had a very terrifying power. He could behead the incapable emperor and kill all the civil and military officials in the court. His power was almost comparable to that of the monarch of a country. The king of the Qin Empire obviously saw Xianxia's unprecedented potential, so he appointed Xianxia as the Imperial Protector. The king of the Qin Empire's order not only stunned everyone in the hall, but even Qin Ji, who was standing next to him, had a look of disbelief on his face. His mind had already gone blank. After a while, the silence was finally broken. An old man with a head full of white hair strode forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Your Majesty, this absolutely cannot be done. With Xianxia's ability, he is indeed qualified to be the State Preceptor, but if he is appointed as the Imperial Protector, I'm afraid it will be very inappropriate." "Your Majesty, Prime Minister Kirill is right. The Imperial Protector has too many implications. It is indeed inappropriate to rashly appoint him. Why don't we let Jianshan be the state preceptor first? Another old man stepped forward. Your Majesty, the imperial protector cannot be appointed rashly. It must be approved by all the state preceptors of the Great Qin Empire, or be approved by several esteemed imperial protectors. The one who spoke was a middle-aged man wearing simple clothes. His face was resolute, and his body emitted a faint murderous aura. He was a general in charge of guarding a region and had real power. Your Majesty, an endless stream of objections came from all over the hall. Although Jianshan's talent and strength were extraordinary, the imperial protector had too many implications. It could almost be said that he was the ruler of a country. With Jianshan's age, many people did not dare to let Jianshan be the imperial protector, but there were many who agreed to let Jianshan be the state preceptor. At this time, more than 20 people came one after another outside the hall. Most of them were old men, and only a few middle-aged men and 3 middle-aged women in their 30s. These people came quietly and stood quietly at the back of the hall. They did not say a word, and very few people noticed their existence. His Majesty, who was sitting at the head of the hall, noticed the sudden arrival of the group at the back of the hall. He immediately showed a faint smile and said, "Yes, as you said, the imperial protector has too many implications. I indeed do not have the right to appoint the imperial protector. It must be approved by all the state preceptors of the Qin Empire or the 4 esteemed imperial protector." His Majesty stood up from the dragon throne and laughed loudly. "In that case, I invite the state preceptors to judge whether nephew Jianshan can be appointed as the imperial protector." "I agree that Jianshan can be appointed as the imperial protector." Several old men standing not far from the king were the first to agree. They were all state preceptors of the Qin Empire. Then they smiled and cupped their hands towards Jianshan, saying, "Greetings to Lord Imperial Protector." "Your Majesty, I'm afraid it's difficult to convince the public with just the approval of a few state preceptors. If you want to appoint the imperial protector, you must get the approval of all the state preceptors of the Qin Empire." An old general cupped his hands and said, "The king of the Qin Empire said with a smile, 'Old General Shu is right. State preceptors, what do you think?'" The king of the Qin Empire looked towards the back of the hall. "We all agree that Jianshan can be appointed as the imperial protector." An old voice was transmitted from the back of the hall. Everyone's gazes involuntarily looked towards the back of the hall when they heard the voice. All of their faces were stunned when they discovered that over 20 people had appeared there at some unknown time. Immediately, they revealed expressions of disbelief. Everyone present was a person of high status, so they all recognized the identity of these 20 people. They were all state preceptors of the Qin Empire. At this moment, all the state preceptors of the Qin Empire had gathered here. The 20 state preceptors walked forward at the same time. The people in front of them consciously made way for them. Soon they came to the front. Their eyes all gathered on Jianshan. Soon after, they all cupped their hands and said, "Greetings to Lord Imperial Protector." Looking at the scene before him, the Qinhuang Kingdom's king immediately laughed heartily and was extremely excited. On the other hand, the authoritative figures in the hall were all dumbfounded. Their faces were filled with disbelief as they looked at the scene before them. At this moment, one of the state preceptors loudly said to everyone, "Everyone, don't doubt this. The appointment of Jianshan as the imperial protector was personally approved by the 4 esteemed imperial protectors of the Qin Empire. Just now, all of us received a message from the 4 esteemed imperial protectors. That's why we've gathered here. If anyone has any doubts about this matter, you can personally go and find the 4 esteemed imperial protectors to verify it." Hearing this, everyone immediately went into an uproar. None of them dared to say another word. The state preceptors of the Qin Empire were all Heaven Saint Masters. When over 20 Heaven Saint Masters bowed to him, Jianshan was stunned. He immediately became somewhat at a loss. What he didn't expect was that he had actually become the imperial protector of the Qin Empire for no reason. "Your Majesty, Jianshan's experience is shallow. I'm afraid it'll be difficult for me to take on such an important task." Jianshan immediately cupped his hands towards the king of the Qin Empire. The king chuckled and said, "Nephew Jianshan, Appointing you as the imperial protector of our empire was approved by the 4 esteemed imperial protectors of the Qin Empire. Such an important task is not something that I can decide. Xianxia's face immediately became filled with hesitation. Becoming the imperial protector of the Qin Empire was no small matter. This matter had come so suddenly that Xianxia clearly found it difficult to make up his mind without carefully considering the pros and cons. Seeing the hesitation on Xianxia's face, Qin Ji, who was standing beside the king of the Qin Empire, immediately became anxious. He constantly shot Xianxia meaningful glances. His relationship with Xianxia was extraordinary, so he obviously wanted Xianxia to become the imperial protector of the Qin Empire. This was an extremely good thing for him. However, Xianxia didn't notice Qin Ji's meaningful glances at all. This was because he was also caught in a dilemma. Although becoming the imperial protector of the Qin Empire would give him a very high status, Xianxia didn't want to be restricted in any way. The entire hall became deathly silent. Everyone's eyes were focused on Xianxia. As for Xiao Han, who had a conflict with Xianxia, his face had already become as pale as a sheet of paper. His entire body was trembling. The authority of the imperial protector was much greater than his grandfather's. It could be said that there was a clear distinction between a superior and a subordinate. Qin Ji's expression became more and more anxious. He was afraid that Xianxia wouldn't accept the position of the imperial protector of the Qin Empire. In the end, he couldn't help but say, "Xianxia, after becoming the imperial protector of the Qin Empire, you will be able to use the Qin Empire's space gate and various resources of the Qin Empire without any restrictions. Moreover, your authority won't be any weaker than my father's." When he heard that he would be able to use the space gate at will, Xianxia's heart skipped a beat. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "Your Majesty, if I become the imperial protector, will my actions be restricted?" "Of course not. Nephew Xianxia, after becoming the imperial protector of the Qin Empire, you won't be restricted in any way. You only need to stand out when the Qin Empire is in danger. At the same time, you can't do anything that will endanger the Qin Empire," the king said with a smile. Hearing this, Xianxia thought to himself. This matter seemed to be beneficial to him. With the strength of the Qin Empire, the chances of him encountering danger were very small. Thinking of this, Xianxia hesitated for a moment. In the end, he still agreed to become the imperial protector of the Qin Empire. "Greetings, Your Excellency, Imperial Protector." After Xianxia agreed, all the nobles and imperial relatives in the hall bowed to Xianxia. The imperial protector had a very prominent status in the Qin Empire. In some ways, the power of the imperial protector was even greater than that of the king of the Qin Empire. This was because if more than half of the imperial protector agreed, they could directly remove the king of the Qin Empire from his position. They could even ignore the king's objections and easily start a large-scale war. From this, it could be seen what kind of status the imperial protector represented in the Qin Empire. Following this, all the state preceptors and nobles of the Qin Empire came forward to befriend Xianxia. Although Xianxia could only be regarded as a fledgling in their eyes, his potential was still there. His future achievements were simply unimaginable. Even the 4 most respected imperial protector of the Qin Empire were shocked. After Xianxia became the imperial protector, Qin Ji was the happiest, the most excited, and the most excited person present. His face was beaming like a pear blossom, and he couldn't close his mouth for a long time. Xianxia's appearance had undoubtedly stolen the limelight that originally belonged to the king of the Qin Empire. Today was the king's birthday, and he should have been the focus of attention. However, the limelight that should have belonged to him was now completely stolen by Xianxia. At this moment, the king of the Qin Empire didn't feel the slightest bit unhappy. On the contrary, he was very excited. The smile that came from the bottom of his heart didn't disappear from his face. Chapter 397. The 50th birthday celebration of the king of the Qin Empire soon came to an end. In the evening, Xianxia returned to his own palace after bidding farewell to all the influential figures. Now that Xianxia was the imperial protector of the Qin Empire, his status was very different from before. In the imperial palace, he was allocated a luxurious palace decorated with gold and jade. The name of the palace was also changed to Qin Heaven Palace. Qin Heaven Palace was a name that could only be given to the palace where the imperial protector lived. Not only was it vast in scale, even the decorations and layout were much better than the Xingyun Palace where the Qinji lived. Jianxin carried the white tiger, who was still sleeping and digesting the medicinal effects, and arrived at his own Qin Heaven Palace accompanied by several palace maids. Looking at the splendid decorations around him, Jianxin was secretly speechless. The decorations of Qin Heaven Palace were too luxurious. Jianxin swore that he had never seen such a luxurious palace before. "Lord Imperial Protector, let us servants help you bathe and change your clothes." Several beautiful palace maids behind Jianxin whispered softly. They all looked at Jianxin's back with anticipation. These palace maids were all carefully selected by the king himself. They were all around 20 years old and were the most beautiful people in the palace. Not only were they heavenly beauties, they were also all virgins. Jianxin looked back and forth at the splendid palace. He waved his hand at the palace maids behind him and said indifferently, "All of you are dismissed." "Lord Imperial Protector, don't you like us to serve you?" The palace maids looked at Jianxin pitifully with a faint desire in their eyes. Jianxin was so handsome and had such a high status as the Imperial Protector. To them, it was a great honor to be able to serve Jianxin. "All of you are dismissed. I'm not used to being served. If there's anything else, I'll call for you." Jianxin's tone was very calm. After he finished speaking, he carried the white tiger and walked towards his bedroom. Looking at Jianxin's disappearing figure, the most outstanding and beautiful palace maids, who were carefully selected from the entire palace, could only reveal disappointed expressions. They then left with a regretful heart. Outside Jianxin's Qin Tian Hall, 500 imperial guards in golden armor were like stone statues. They solemnly guarded the surroundings, and every single one of them had an extremely proud expression. To be able to become the imperial protector's personal guard was a great honor to them. Their status in the entire imperial palace was incomparably respected. Other than the other 4 imperial protector's personal guards, it could be said that no other army had a higher status than them. These imperial guards were all great Saint Masters. They were led by 5 captains who were Earth Saint Masters and 1 general who was a 6th cycle Earth Saint Master. They guarded the surroundings of the Qin Tian Hall day and night. It could be said that they were Jianxin's personal army that was specially made to serve the imperial protector. Even the king was unable to command them. The night quickly passed. Early the next morning, a captain's voice rang out from outside, reporting to the imperial protector, "The 3rd prince, Qinji, wishes to see you." Jianchen had become the imperial protector of the Qin Huang kingdom. In just a single day, Jianchen's status had become much higher than Qinji's. Now, if Qinji wanted to enter the Qin Heavenly Palace, he would need Jianchen's permission. Very soon, Jianchen walked out from the Qin Sky Palace and personally invited Qinji in. This caused Qinji to be overwhelmed by the unexpected favor, causing him to feel extremely emotional. Inside the Qin Tian Hall, Jianchen dismissed all the palace maids and then began to chat with Qinji. Qinji also excitedly congratulated Jianchen on becoming the imperial protector of the Qin Empire. He was truly happy for Jianchen from the bottom of his heart. Jianchen also smiled as he exchanged pleasantries with Qinji. Although his status had changed greatly, it did not affect his mental state at all. He still treated Qinji as a friend because he knew that if Qinji had not invited him to attend his father's birthday celebration, he would not have such a high status. "Jianchen, you are now the imperial protector of the Qin Empire. You can use the spatial gate whenever you want. However, I still hope that you can stay here for a while longer." Qinji and Jianchen sat opposite each other and smiled faintly. Jianchen shook his head and said solemnly, "No, I'm in a hurry. Since I can use the spatial gate whenever I want, I'll leave now. The longer I delay, the more uneasy I feel." "Jianchen, can you tell me why you're in such a hurry?" "Who knows, I might be able to come up with some ideas for you," Qinji asked with concern. Now that Jianchen's status had changed greatly, he had to do his best to curry favor with Jianchen. Jianxin hesitated slightly when he heard that. He said, "That's my hometown. There's probably a war there right now. I need to hurry over as soon as possible, or the consequences will be unimaginable." Qinji's face also became somewhat stern. He then asked Jianxin about the strength of that region. After hearing that, he immediately relaxed and chuckled, "It's just a small matter. My Qin Empire only needs an army to deal with a few small countries. Jianxin, you can mobilize 1,000,000 elites of my Qin Empire right now. Do you want to send reinforcements?" "There's no need for that. This place is very far from my hometown. With my speed, it'll take me 2 or 3 months to get there." Coupled with the fact that the army moves extremely slowly, it'll probably be several years before they get there, Jianxin rejected without any hesitation. "Then why don't you just take a few imperial protectors with you? With your status, even if you take all the imperial protectors of the Qin Empire, no one will object. Don't worry, my Qin Empire still has 4 extremely powerful imperial protectors. There won't be any problems with your safety," Qinji suggested. Jianxin hesitated when he heard that. He knew that the kingdom of Jessen only had around 10 Heaven Saint Masters, while the 4 kingdoms had 20 to 30. The difference was just too great. Seeing Jianxin's hesitation, Qinji knew that Jianxin was tempted. He immediately added fuel to the fire. "Jianxin, don't hesitate. Don't forget your current status. You have the authority to mobilize these forces." Jianxin thought about it and nodded in the end. For safety's sake, he decided to take a few imperial protectors of the Qin Empire with him. "Jianxin, the movements of the imperial protectors are not restricted. Moreover, you were the one who gave the order this time, so there's no need to report it to my father. Just order the imperial protectors of the Qin Heavenly Hall to gather the imperial protectors." Qinji advised Jianxin. Jianxin did not understand the matters of the imperial palace and his authority as well as Qinji. Afterward, Jianxin followed Qinji's suggestion and ordered the imperial protectors to invite the imperial protectors to the Qin Heavenly Hall. Very soon, over 20 imperial protectors of various ages gathered in the Qin Heavenly Hall. Although Jianxin was young, his status and strength were there for all to see. His great potential had already won the respect of all the imperial protectors. All the imperial protectors took advantage of the fact that the difference between them and Jianxin was not too great to try to befriend him. They knew that Jianxin's status had been personally appointed by one of the 4 imperial protectors. He would definitely become a saint ruler in the future and even have the chance to become a holy emperor. At that time, it would not be as easy for them to get close to him. Now was the perfect time to cultivate their relationship. Jianxin told his thoughts to the imperial protectors. Immediately, all of them expressed their willingness to go with Jianxin. Their enthusiasm made Jianxin wonder who was the one asking for help between him and the imperial protectors. The feeling was completely reversed. At this moment, a sage-like old man stepped forward and clasped his hands. "Imperial protector, I am Xiao Tian. Xiao Han is my grandson. I heard yesterday that my useless grandson had actually offended you, Imperial Protector. I hope you can forgive my useless grandson. I have already locked him up and taught him a harsh lesson. Xiao Tian is willing to go with you, Imperial Protector, to atone for my grandson's sins. I hope you will allow it." Jianxin immediately looked at Xiao Tian and carefully studied him. Xiao Tian wore white robes and had a sage-like demeanor. He had white hair and a ruddy complexion. His silver white hair was tied into a knot above his head. He gave off a heroic aura that faintly gave off an aura of justice. He was very extraordinary. Is this the extremely talented 5th cycle Heaven Saint Master that Qinji spoke of? Jianxin thought inside. Hearing about Xiao Tian was not as good as meeting him in person. After personally seeing Xiao Tian, Jianxin had a feeling that Xiao Tian would definitely achieve great things in the future. At the same time, he could vaguely sense an aura of justice from Xiao Tian. This was definitely an open and above-board person, very different from his grandson, Xiao Han. Although he thought like that, Jianxin's expression did not change. He clasped his hands and smiled. "Mr. Xiao Tian must be joking. Jianxin has completely forgotten about your grandson. Since Mr. Xiao Tian is willing to go with me, Jianshan has no reason to disagree. Jianshan is extremely grateful for Mr. Xiao Tian's assistance. Xiao Tian laughed heartily and said, Imperial Protector is too modest. To be able to travel with Mr. Imperial Protector is my honor. Afterwards, Jianshan chose 4 Imperial Protectors who were stronger and more reliable to go with him to the kingdom of Jessan. After the selection, everyone left the Qin Heaven Hall together and walked towards the space gate under the lead of the 3rd prince. Out of the 5 Imperial Protectors that Jianshan brought, Xiao Tian was the strongest. He was a 5th cycle Heaven Saint Master. Out of the remaining 4, 2 were in the 4th cycle and 2 were in the 3rd cycle. Although these people were not the strongest among the Imperial Protectors, in Jianshan's heart, the 5 of them were the most trustworthy. The space gate of the Qin Empire was at the center of the Imperial Palace. With Jianshan's current status, he did not need to report to anyone when using the space gate. He brought the 5 Imperial Protectors to the space gate. Immediately, 2 of the Imperial Protectors threw out a few Class 5 monster cores to activate the space gate. After quickly determining a general location, Jianshan and the 5 Imperial Protectors left the Qin Empire through the space gate. Chapter 398. With a single step, Jianshan was already several 100,000 kilometers away from the Qin Empire. When Jianshan and the 5 Imperial advisors came out of the space gate, they had already arrived in an unfamiliar region. The space gate slowly disappeared after sending them in. Jianshan held the much bigger white tiger in his arms as he scanned the surroundings. He discovered that this was an extremely desolate and dry land. Not a single blade of grass grew on the ground. As far as the eye could see, there was no sign of life. Sir Imperial Protector, what is this place? An Imperial advisor of the Qin Empire softly asked from behind Jianshan. His eyes also scanned the surroundings, studying the environment. Qing Xiaofan, just follow behind Sir Imperial Protector. What's with all this nonsense? Immediately, another Imperial advisor frowned and said. Hearing this, Qing Xiaofan dryly laughed and embarrassedly said, I'm just curious. The 5 Imperial advisors that came with Jianshan were called Xiaotian, Qing Xiaofan, Dongyi Junbai, Chao Kaqin, and Tian Luo. Among the 5, there were 4 old men and 1 middle-aged man. The 2 old men who spoke were called Qing Xiaofan and Dongyi Junbai. They were 2 4th cycle Heaven Saint Masters, while Chao Kaqin and Tian Luo were 3rd cycle Heaven Saint Masters. The 5 of them were all over 100 years old. At this moment, the white tiger in Jianshan's arms suddenly woke up. It opened its bright eyes and curiously looked around. Noticing the movement in his arms, Jianshan immediately placed the white tiger on the ground. He was no longer willing to hold it in his arms because the white tiger's body had already grown a lot. Its body looked like an adult dog, so it was no longer suitable to stay in Jianshan's arms. As soon as it landed on the ground, the little white tiger immediately began to run happily. It circled around everyone and occasionally came to the feet of the 5 Imperial advisors to sniff around with its cute nose. Jianshan took out a few maps from his space ring and began to look at them. After a while, he threw them on the ground in disappointment and said, I don't have a map of this area, so I don't know where this place is. Let's ask a few passers-by. Jianshan did not have the exact coordinates of the kingdom of Jessan, so the space gate could only send them to an approximate location. Now, Jianshan did not know whether or not he was in the kingdom of Jessan. Qin Xiaofeng immediately cupped his hands and smiled. We'll follow Sir Imperial Protector's decision. All right then, let's leave this place. As he spoke, Jianshan waved his hand and a dense wind element enveloped the white tiger's entire body. Then, he took the white tiger into the air. Ooh! Ooh! The white tiger immediately cried out in dissatisfaction. Its body kept flapping in the air as if it wanted to jump into Jianshan's arms. It looked at Jianshan pitifully with tears in its eyes. Oh Sir Imperial Protector, your magical beast is quite intelligent. It must be the cub of a high-level magical beast. Qing Xiaofan immediately joked. Jianshan chuckled and did not explain. He then floated over to the white tiger and knocked its little head. He jokingly scolded, You're already so big and you still need someone to carry you? I can't carry you now. Let me control the energy of the world to carry you. Don't worry, you won't fall. The white tiger seemed to understand Xianxin's words. It kept shaking its little head and tears were rolling in its eyes as if they would fall to the ground at any time. Then, the white tiger's body shrunk at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon, it turned back into a cub the size of a kitten. It was very cute. This magical beast can actually change the size of its body. It's unbelievable. The 5 imperial advisors all stared with wide eyes as they looked at the white tiger in amazement. Even Xianxin had a shocked expression on his face. However, when he thought of the white tiger's true identity, he understood. He glanced at the 5 imperial advisors behind him from the corner of his eyes and smiled faintly. This white tiger was born different from the rest. This ability to change the size of its body at will might be its innate ability. That's right. This magical beast looks like a tiger, but it has a pair of wings on its back. It must be a mutated species. Some mutated magical beasts have innate abilities that people don't know about. There are also many magical beasts that can change the size of their bodies on the Tianyuan continent. Dongyi Junbai said in agreement. He was the oldest among the people present and had the most experience. Seeing that no one was looking into the identity of the white tiger, Xianxin secretly let out a sigh of relief. He then picked up the white tiger that had shrunk to the size of a kitten and flew off in a certain direction. An hour later, Xianxin and the others had already flown several hundred kilometers. At this moment, a sizable city appeared in front of Xianxin's eyes. Xianxin's eyes lit up. He immediately sped up and flew over. In the end, he landed in a place with no people and entered the city on foot. This was a Grade 2 city. It was not very large. Xianxin walked through the streets with the 5 imperial advisors of the Qin Empire. The white tiger in his arms constantly looked around, as if it was curious about everything around it. Xianxin went to the largest store in the city and bought a map that recorded the largest area. Very soon he found the location of the Kingdom of Jessin. They were still over 15,000 kilometers away from the Kingdom of Jessin. They still had to pass through 2 more kingdoms. Shopkeeper, I'd like to ask you something. What's the current situation in the Kingdom of Jessin? Is there a war going on? Xianxin asked. I don't know about the current situation in the Kingdom of Jessin. It's too far away, so it's very difficult for news to reach here. However, I've heard that a war broke out in the Kingdom of Jessin 3 months ago. It seems like it's a 4-nation alliance. Sigh, the Kingdom of Jessin is done for this time. The shopkeeper sighed. Xianxin's expression changed slightly when he heard this. He took out a purple coin and threw it on the table. He took the map and walked out. After determining the direction, he immediately rose into the air and flew toward the Kingdom of Jessin. The 5 imperial advisors also rose into the air and followed closely behind Xianxin. They left behind a street full of people who stared at the 6 people in shock. Only after a long while did the street erupt into an intense discussion. In a second-class city, Earth Saint Masters were already very rare, let alone Heaven Saint Masters. Now that 6 of them had appeared, it was easy to imagine how great of an impact it had on everyone's hearts. Xianxin and the others flew day and night without rest. After a day and night of traveling, they finally arrived at the Kingdom of Jessin, a neighboring country called the Qiangan Kingdom. He then landed in a small city near the border fortress to gather information. He needed to understand the current situation in the Kingdom of Jessin so that he could come up with a plan. Chapter 399. Early in the morning was the peak time for breakfast. Xianxin carried the white tiger to the largest restaurant in the center of the town with the 5 imperial advisors of the Qin Empire. The 6 of them occupied a large round table, which was filled with the most expensive breakfast dishes in the restaurant. The white tiger lay on the table, wolfing down a large plate of delicious barbecued beef that Xianxin had ordered for it. It whimpered excitedly from time to time, attracting the curious gazes of the customers in the restaurant. Xianxin sat at the table with a heavy heart, listening to the discussions around him. He had no appetite at all. The Qingan kingdom was very close to the kingdom of Jesson, so they could obtain the most accurate information about the war in the kingdom of Jesson. To the mercenaries who often roamed the Tianyuan continent, not only did the news spread very quickly, it was also more reliable. The kingdom of Jesson is most likely done for this time. The four palaces have over 2,000 soldiers in total. How can the kingdom of Jesson stop the allied army of the four empires with only a few million soldiers? The territory that the Jesson kingdom occupies is the most fertile area in this region, and it has long since attracted the envy of the surrounding kingdoms. Although the kingdom of Jesson has managed to hold on for a few months with their sturdy fortresses, the continuous battles have depleted their forces far too much. I heard that the kingdom of Jesson only has 1 million soldiers left from the original 6 million soldiers. The entire kingdom is now urgently recruiting more soldiers. The kingdom of Jesson only has around 200 intermediate crystal cannons to support them. I heard that they don't have enough monster cores anymore. Even the large amount of monster cores stored in the national treasury has been used up. The monster cores used to fire the crystal cannons are all donated by the various factions in the kingdom. Half a month ago, a dozen intermediate crystal cannons of the kingdom of Jesson self-destructed because they were used too often. They blasted a few large holes in the fortresses, resulting in the deaths of over 1,000 people. The kingdom of Jesson is far too weak compared to the allied army of the four empires. Even if the kingdom of Jesson were to gather all the soldiers and mercenaries they hired, they would not have more than 3 million soldiers. On the other hand, the allied army of the four empires has over 10 million soldiers and twice as many peak experts as the kingdom of Jesson. The kingdom of Jesson is doomed this time. I heard that 2 Heaven Saint Masters from the kingdom of Jesson died 7 days ago. 3 of them were heavily injured. On the other hand, only 1 Heaven Saint Master from the allied army was on the verge of death. I heard that he was saved by a Radiant Saint Master in the end. The rest of them only suffered some injuries of varying severity. There weren't many losses. Xianxia's face became more and more solemn as he listened to the news. Although the situation was not as bad as it seemed, the kingdom of Jesson was not in a good situation. The difference in strength was just too great. You don't know about this. I just returned from the Flaming Kingdom 3 days ago. I heard that there was a Heaven Saint Master from the kingdom of Jesson who was extremely powerful. He fought against 6 Heaven Saint Masters from the allied army by himself. Although he was heavily injured in the end, he used a shocking Heaven tier battle skill to kill 2 Heaven Saint Masters and heavily injure 3 others. In the end, the Heaven Saint Masters of the allied army all lost their courage to continue fighting and fled miserably. Yeah, I've heard about this as well. I heard that the powerful Heaven Saint Master used to keep a very low profile in the kingdom of Jesson. He wasn't even ranked among the 10 great experts. Very few people know of his existence. I think his name is Chang Wuji or something. At this moment, a few more travel-worn mercenaries walked in from outside. Hearing the discussions of the crowd, the leader immediately said, "That's nothing. That Chang Wuji's strength must have reached the peak. Otherwise, it's impossible for him to possess such battle prowess." Let me tell you something even more shocking. In the battle 3 days ago, an Earth Saint Master heavily injured a peak Heaven Saint Master from the Blue Wind Kingdom. That's impossible. How can an Earth Saint Master be the opponent of a Heaven Saint Master? I don't believe it. Who are you trying to fool? Everyone in the restaurant snorted disdainfully. They didn't believe the mercenaries' words at all. Heh, I'm not lying to you. I heard that the Earth Saint Master even knew a Heaven tier battle skill. He used it to heavily injure a Heaven Saint Master. If it weren't for a Heaven Saint Master from the Four Nation Alliance who saved him in time, that Heaven Saint Master probably would have been killed in a single strike. That scene was so spectacular. Once the Heaven tier battle skill was used, the weather changed and a thick layer of dark clouds gathered in the sky. The ground was covered in sand and rocks, making it impossible to see anything clearly. I heard that the Earth Saint Master's Heaven tier battle skill directly caused a violent earthquake. The earth shook and the mountains shook. It almost collapsed the fortress of the kingdom of Jesson. Everyone was stunned by the Earth Saint Master's battle prowess. No wonder I felt the ground shake 3 days ago. It can't be real, right? That's just too terrifying. This place is at least 1,000 kilometers away from the fortress of the kingdom of Jessin. How can it be so far away? The earthquake caused by a heaven-tier battle skill can actually reach so far away. That's just too ridiculous. The man continued, that's not all. I heard that the Earth's Saint Master is wind-attributed Saint Force. His speed is unbelievably fast. He's basically a monster. He managed to contend with a Heaven Saint Master for half a day with just his speed alone. 2 Heaven Saint Masters tried to hunt him down, but he managed to escape easily. His speed is just too monstrous. It can't be that powerful. Is he really an Earth Saint Master? The people in the restaurant all paled. The Earth Saint Master was just far too powerful. Hearing the discussions, Xianxia couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. He had already guessed that the Earth Saint Master with unimaginable speed and a heaven-tier battle skill was definitely Ming Dong. The man obviously knew a lot of the latest news. He proudly continued, the death of 2 Heaven Saint Masters is something that the 4 countries can't accept. 2 days ago, the 4 countries sent an army of 2 million to attack the northern fortress of the kingdom of Jessin. The battle lasted for an entire day and night, and blood flowed like rivers. Corpses piled up like mountains. Now, the northern fortress of the kingdom of Jessin is in tatters. Even the tempered steel gate has been deformed. Both sides have suffered countless casualties. I heard that a Heaven Saint Master from the kingdom of Pingyang even captured a general alive and chopped off his arms and legs. He's been hanging on the fortress of the kingdom of Pingyang for an entire day. That's just too cruel. Don't tell me that the kingdom of Pingyang has some sort of deep grudge with that general? Is there a need to do this when they have the upper hand? Both his arms and legs have been chopped off. That general must be a famous general. Everyone in the inn was discussing animatedly. The information brought by this burly man was the latest news, which attracted everyone's attention. The man chuckled and shook his head. You've guessed wrong. That general isn't some famous general. Instead, he's an unknown commander. I think his name is Changyang Hu, and he's only a major general. As soon as the man finished speaking, Xianxia, who was eating breakfast not far away, suddenly trembled. His face suddenly changed and turned pale. His body turned into a shadow and arrived in front of the man in an instant. His slender fingers tightly grabbed the man's collar and lifted him up from the bench. He shouted, "What did you just say? Whose arms and legs were chopped off and are hanging on the fortress wall?" Xianxia's eyes were red and sharp. "Bastard, you're courting death." The man was also a hot-tempered man. He immediately flew into a rage and roared. His hands were about to grab Xianxia's neck. "Speak." Xianxia roared like an enraged lion. The entire restaurant trembled slightly with his roar. At that moment, his eyes became extremely sharp. They shone like lightning, stabbing deeply into the man's eyes like a sword. It made the man's eyes hurt. Just his gaze alone was enough to make the man not dare to look him in the eye. At the same time, an extremely powerful killing intent radiated from Xianxia. It soared into the sky, making everyone in the restaurant feel like they had fallen into an ice cavern. They felt cold from head to toe. The noisy inn immediately fell silent. Everyone stared at the furious Xianxia in shock. They remained where they were as they trembled, not daring to move at all. Just from this aura, everyone present knew that this young man in front of them possessed a terrifyingly powerful strength. The man who had been grabbed by the collar by Xianxia was scared silly. He no longer had the arrogance from before. His face was extremely pale and he trembled all over. The killing intent radiating from Xianxia was overwhelming. It was extremely powerful, making the man feel like he could not breathe at all. It was as if he was about to suffocate to death. "Kill me. What do you want to know? I'll tell you everything I know." The man finally lost his temper. His face was filled with fear and his voice trembled. Xianxia gave him the feeling of an inviolable god of death. It made him tremble from the bottom of his soul. Xianxia stared at the man with an extremely sharp gaze. He did not hide the intense killing intent in his eyes at all. He roared furiously, Who has his arms and legs cut off and is hanging on the wall? If you dare to lie to me, I'll make sure you die a horrible death." Xianxia practically roared out the last sentence. His eyes were already slightly bloodshot. Chapter 400. After receiving confirmation, Xianxia's expression became extremely gloomy. The murderous aura that radiated from his body quickly spread out from the inn and enveloped the entire street. Everyone on the street couldn't help but shrink their necks. They felt as if the temperature between heaven and earth had suddenly dropped to a few dozen degrees below zero. Not only did they feel cold all over, but even their souls were trembling. The 5 imperial advisors of the Qin Empire who came with Xianxia looked at each other and saw a trace of shock and astonishment in each other's eyes. The murderous aura radiating from Xianxia was so strong that it made all 5 of them feel extremely frightened. "Big brother." There was a faint red color in Xianxia's eyes, as if there was blood condensing in them. He murmured in a low voice and then threw the burly man out. His figure flashed and he was already out of the inn. Then, a surge of wind element madly rushed toward him and wrapped around his body. His body quickly rose into the air. A faint green light flashed and then disappeared. Xianxia flew into the distance at lightning speed and disappeared in the blink of an eye. "Lord Imperial Protector!" The imperial advisors of the Qin Empire shouted one after another. They all stood up from their seats and looked extremely serious. When they saw Xianxia's expression and thought about what the burly man had said, they all guessed that the person who had his hands and feet cut off must have a close relationship with Lord Imperial Protector. "The 5 of you immediately depart and assist the Kingdom of Jesson in fighting against the allied forces of the 4 empires. Protect everyone in Changyang Prefecture." Xianxia's voice sounded in the ears of the 5 imperial advisors. His voice was extremely cold. Xianxia's voice transmission stunned the 5 imperial advisors. Their eyes were filled with shock. The 5 of them looked at each other and Xian, who was the strongest among them, said, "Let's go. We'll all go to the Kingdom of Jesson." Woo woo woo, woo 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 woo. Xianxia's sudden departure made the white tiger very sad. He couldn't care less about the delicious barbecued beef on the table. He jumped down from the table and turned into a white shadow as he ran to the entrance of the inn. He looked at the sky with watery eyes and kept howling. His voice was filled with desolation, as if he was a child who had been heartlessly abandoned by his mother. He looked very pitiful and pitiful. Looking at the pitiful appearance of the white tiger, the 5 Qin Empire's imperial advisors couldn't bear to see him like this. Xiao Tian gently walked forward and cradled the white tiger in his arms. He then turned around and said to the others, "Let's go." Then, the 5 Qin Empire's imperial advisors walked out of the inn and directly flew into the air. They disappeared into the sky, leaving behind the stunned people in the inn. Xianxia's body was wrapped in a thick layer of wind-attributed Saint force. His entire body emitted a strong layer of pale green light. Even in the daytime, he was very eye-catching. Now, he had raised his speed to the limit and hurriedly flew towards the border fortress of the Kingdom of Pingyang. In Xianxia's mind, he couldn't help but recall the scenes of him and his elder brother, Changyang. In Xianxia's heart, Changyang was definitely a family member that he couldn't forget. Although his elder brother didn't help him much in the past at Kargath Academy, and he even helped his elder brother a lot, his elder brother Changyang, care for him came from the bottom of his heart. At that time, Changyang was the 4th person in Xianxia's heart besides his parents and Changyang Mingyue. Although Xianxia had wandered outside for a few years, he was still the same old Xianxia. His temperament hadn't changed much. Those family members of the past were still the biggest concern in Xianxia's heart. "Elder brother, you can't let anything happen to you. Otherwise, I, Xianxia, swear that I will raise the Kingdom of Pingyang to the ground and let the 4 allied countries accompany you in death." Xianxia's face was incomparably gloomy. His eyes were faintly bloodshot. That strong killing intent was enough to make people tremble in fear. The Kingdom of Jesson was surrounded by 6 other kingdoms. The Qiangan Kingdom, the Pingyang Kingdom and the Kingdom of Jesson were all connected in a triangle. Jianshan flew away from the border fortress of the Qiangan Kingdom and followed the directions on the map for 2 hours. After crossing over 3,000 kilometers, he finally arrived at the border fortress of the Kingdom of Pingyang. From afar, the huge fortress of the Kingdom of Pingyang appeared in Jianshan's mind. The 80-meter-tall walls were filled with stern-looking soldiers. Currently, the fortress of the Kingdom of Pingyang had gathered over 2 million soldiers. Looking from the sky, just the tents alone stretched for several kilometers. There were even large tents set up outside the fortress. Groups of patrolling soldiers shuttled through the tents. The vanguard of the Kingdom of Pingyang had already gathered over 1 million soldiers outside the northern fortress of the Kingdom of Jessen. Although they were all attacking the northern fortress of the Kingdom of Jessen, the 2 million soldiers here were all reserve troops. If the front line needed them, they could be sent over at any time. Jianshan stopped a dozen kilometers away from the Kingdom of Pingyang. His eyes were filled with pain as he looked ahead. His body that was 1,000 meters in the air was also trembling. 15 kilometers away, a man with severed arms and legs was hung on the wall of a fortress. His clothes were dyed red with blood, and he looked like a bloody man. His long hair was tied up with a thick hemp rope, and his body was hung on the wall. Although they were a dozen kilometers apart, Jianshan's divine sense could clearly see the other party's appearance. That familiar face, wasn't it his elder brother, Changyanghu? A few years had passed, and Changyanghu hadn't changed much. However, at this moment, his face was as pale as a sheet of paper. His eyes were tightly shut, and it was unknown whether he was dead or alive. Seeing his elder brother, Changyanghu, in such a pitiful state, Jianshan's eyes were bloodshot. 2 streaks of blood flowed down from his eyes. His body that was suspended in the air was trembling violently. It was as if he couldn't control himself and was about to fall from the sky. In the past, he had thought more than once about how much shock and joy he would bring to his few relatives when he returned home and saw them. In the past, he had thought more than once about what expression his elder brother, Changyanghu, would have when he returned to Kargath Academy and saw his current strength. However, he had never thought that when he returned home with such great achievements and met his elder brother, Changyanghu, he would be met with such a heart-wrenching tragedy. It was a scene that he couldn't accept. "Elder brother!" Jianshan let out a sorrowful cry. His eyes instantly turned red. An extremely strong killing intent gushed out from his body like a huge wave, dispersing the clouds. Then, Jianshan's figure turned into a green light and rushed to the top of the fortress wall at a speed that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. The 2 million soldiers in the fortress of the Pingyang Kingdom were all alarmed. The soldiers who were resting in their tents all crawled out and looked up at the sky. With a dignified expression, they stared at Jianshan who was flying over. Boom, 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 boom. The dull sound of war drums came from the top of the fortress. The sound was very urgent, indicating that a great enemy was about to invade. The whole city was on alert. On top of the fortress wall, a middle-aged man wearing armor walked out from the tower. Seeing Jianshan flying over, his face suddenly became very dignified. He shouted, "Release the crossbows." As soon as his voice fell, the sound of air braking could be heard one after another. Huge crossbows as thick as an arm shot towards Jianshan with ear-piercing sounds. Jianshan's eyes faintly flashed with purple light. When those crossbows shot out for a few kilometers, their speed suddenly decreased greatly. Soon they were suspended in the air. Then, under the shocked gaze of all the soldiers below, all the crossbows actually slowly changed direction in the air. Then, a layer of hazy purple light suddenly flashed. Every crossbow arrow with a faint purple light suddenly shot back towards the fortress. The expression of the general who was standing on top of the fortress wall changed greatly. However, before he could give any orders, the reversed crossbows shot towards the fortress wall at a speed that was much faster than when they were shot. Boom, 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 boom. Following a series of violent explosions, numerous holes appeared on the sturdy fortress wall, stirring up a large cloud of dust. Countless soldiers were pierced through the chest, and several towers immediately collapsed. At this time, Jianshan had already arrived in front of Changyanghu. He cut off the hemp rope that was hanging Changyang with an incomparably sorrowful expression. His eyes were filled with tears of blood, and he held Changyang's body very carefully in his arms. "Big brother." Looking at the unconscious Changyang, Jianshan's face was filled with grief. Now, his big brother had almost become a cripple. He was unable to accept this fact. Jianshan hurriedly took out a few radiant spirit pills from his space ring that he had obtained during the elimination round of the mercenary tournament and fed them all to Changyang to save his life. Although Changyang was not dead, his situation was extremely terrible. He had lost too much blood, and his life was hanging by a thread. The general standing on top of the fortress wall immediately took out a precious jade from his space ring and crushed it before leaping off the wall and disappearing. With his strength as an Earth Saint Master, he was basically powerless in front of a Heaven Saint Master. The only way he could survive was to flee. Release the arrows, shoot him down. The soldiers below all began to yell out. They all drew their bows and aimed at Jianshan. Arrows shot towards Jianshan like moths to a flame, blotting out the sun. The killing intent in Jianshan's eyes had already reached its peak. At this moment, his eyes suddenly turned purple as a powerful mental force permeated the surroundings. Before the arrows shot towards Jianshan could even approach Jianshan's body, they all stopped in the air. Afterwards, they changed directions and shot towards the soldiers below at an even faster speed. Immediately, miserable cries rang out from below as the densely packed soldiers collapsed in droves. With their strength, it was impossible for them to survive after being pierced by the arrows with Azulite sword chi. Jianshan controlled the tens of thousands of arrows to shoot through the crowd below, mercilessly slaughtering the soldiers below. In just a few short breaths, not a single one of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers stationed outside the fortress was spared. Afterwards, the tens of thousands of arrows under Jianshan's control quickly condensed into a huge sword that was several dozen meters long in front of Jianshan. It shot towards the fortress with lightning speed. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.